So there I was, standing on my porch, watching an HOA officer yank out a taser and fire at my sister. Yeah, my actual sister. What they didn't know, she's Special Forces, and her old unit, already watching with laser sights trained right on the idiot's chest. Now before you ask, wait, what? How is that even legal? And how did she not notice? Let me explain. In this neighborhood, legality is more like a suggestion. And as for noticing, oh, she noticed. She just let it play out, because Lena doesn't flinch at power-tripping HOA mall cops with tactical daydreams. Me? I flinched. I was holding a coffee cup. The calm of the usual early evening shattered as chaos unfolded on my front porch. I could hardly believe the surreal scene. One of our overzealous HOA cops, emboldened by a misplaced sense of authority, had just tried to subdue my sister Lena with a taser. There she stood, Lena, calm and unyielding, her steely eyes already glancing sideways as if assessing an incoming threat. And in the background, silhouettes in tactical gear, members of her old unit, appeared on a nearby rooftop, their presence like a silent promise that backup was more than just a rumor. In that split second, the absurdity of suburban law enforcement colliding with genuine military expertise was impossible to ignore. I couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and admiration. Here was my sister, who had once been a fierce force in the field, now confronted with a bunch of overgrown, armchair HOA cops trying to enforce petty rules on a quiet suburban street. It was as if the universe had arranged for the ultimate comeuppance for those who thought they could use bureaucracy as a weapon. Lena's nonchalant poise, her slight raised eyebrow at the attempt on her dignity, spoke volumes. She wasn't about to be pushed around. Even as the taser crackled through the air, Lena's calm smile hinted at years of training that had taught her to anticipate and neutralize such buffoonery. I stood there, coffee cup trembling in my hand, unable to tear my eyes away from the unfolding standoff. The HOA officer's bravado was crumbling fast as Lena, with a measured tilt of her head and a quiet word that I couldn't quite catch over the commotion, signaled her unit. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. What could have been a humiliating moment for an overzealous enforcer was rapidly becoming an epic confrontation between clueless suburban cops and a battle-hardened Special Forces veteran. It was in that charged silence that I knew one thing for certain. Tonight, the rules would be rewritten. Cedar Glen Estates was the kind of gated community where every lawn was trimmed to perfection, every house painted in soft pastel tones, and every resident was expected to maintain a facade of pristine order. The Homeowners Association ruled with a nearly ironclad grip, and its unofficial enforcer, Karen Jenkins, had become synonymous with unwavering and often petty order. Karen, in her late 40s, was always seen in smart blouses, a pencil skirt, and her ever-present clipboard. To her, any deviation from her precise vision of neighborhood beauty was not only unacceptable, but a personal affront. In stark contrast stood my modest home on the outskirts of Cedar Glen, a sanctuary of authenticity and hard-won freedom. My life here was built on decades of family legacy and an unyielding determination to live by my own rules. I was known in the community as a man who valued integrity and was unafraid to challenge unnecessary authority. My younger sister Lena, my rock and my protector since childhood, had once served in Special Forces. Though she now preferred a quieter life, the fire and discipline of her training remained evident in her every move. Our home, with its warmly lit porch and well-tended garden, was a blend of rural charm and understated modernity. I had built a small workshop behind the house where I tinkered with gadgets and homemade innovations. It was here that creativity met practicality, and while some of the neighbors might have frowned upon my eccentric hobbies, I saw them as a celebration of individuality. My routine had always been simple: a quiet morning, strong coffee, and a day spent pursuing my passions on my own terms. Karen Jenkins, however, had made it her mission to police every inch of Cedar Glen, and no one was exempt from her scrutiny. Over the past few years, she'd fined residents for the slightest infraction: dull mailbox colors, unapproved holiday displays, or even for not adhering strictly to the HOA's community spirit directives. Her latest obsession involved ensuring that every piece of property contributed to the polished image of our neighborhood, even if it meant steamrolling over personal freedoms. It wasn't long before Karen set her sights on me, convinced that I was the embodiment of nonconformity. Lena's storied past in the Special Forces, her daring exploits, and my various ventures had all rubbed her the wrong way. And so, when an incident involving a taser and my sister unfolded on that fateful evening, it was clear that Karen's crusade against disruption had reached an all-time high. In Cedar Glen, conformity was king, and individuality was the enemy of order, or so she believed. The stage was thus perfectly set for an unforgettable showdown. The tension in the air was almost palpable as the strict, rule-bound world of Karen Jenkins collided with the raw, unbridled spirit embodied by Lena and our family. Little did anyone know that the events unfolding on that cool evening would ignite not only a personal battle, but also challenge the very foundations of what it meant to live in Cedar Glen. Amid the neatly trimmed hedges and glossy community floors, a new reality was about to take shape, one that would remind everyone that sometimes laws are only suggestions, especially when special forces run the show. The conflict began on a seemingly ordinary evening in Cedar Glen, one that quickly turned extraordinary. I had always known that Karen Jenkins thrived on turning even the smallest infraction into a spectacle. Her constant vigilance and readiness to fine anyone who didn't conform was well known to every resident, although most tried to keep their heads down and minds quiet. Still, the sheer audacity of what unfolded that evening was beyond anything I could have expected. It all started when Karen's eyes fell on Lena. Our neighbors would later whisper that she had been watching from behind drawn blinds, a cold fury burning in her eyes as she observed my sister's calm demeanor, even in the face of a taser-wielding officer. The HOA officer, a middle-aged man with a flat expression and a too-bright uniform, had confidently marched up to Lena, taser in hand, as if to demonstrate that even those who dared to defy minor rules would be disciplined. What they didn't realize was that Lena was not just any resident. Her Special Forces training had honed her instincts to a razor's edge, and even as the taser crackled through the air, she allowed it to pass by like an annoying mosquito. She barely flinched, because she knew exactly how to handle such baseless aggression. I watched in horror and disbelief as the officer's actions escalated. The moment was surreal. Here I was, holding a coffee cup, feeling a chill not entirely due to the early evening air, while an officer backed by the HOA's misguided mandate aimed his weapon at my sister. The officer's hand shook slightly as he yanked out the taser, perhaps anticipating a confrontation that Lena would not, or could not, allow. But what happened next left everyone stunned. Lena's eyes narrowed as she casually sidestepped, her movements fluid and precise, honed by years of intense training. In that split second, a commotion behind her signaled that her old unit was already on standby, their covert positions watching in silence with laser-like focus. The tension was electric. In the background, those who had once followed Karen's lead began to murmur, aware that something monumental was about to occur. Fueled by the absurdity of the situation and the realization that the HOA's petty enforcement had crossed a line, I felt a surge of resolve. How could a woman so obsessed with order, and an officer so blindly enforcing trivial rules, fail to grasp the gravity of what they were doing? That night, as the taser sparks faded into the darkness, I knew we couldn't let this incident go unanswered. I began collecting every piece of evidence. Images of the taser in action, the calculated ease in Lena's sidestep, and even whispers from neighbors who reported seeing unusual figures on rooftops, their silhouettes unmistakably marked by military bearing. Every record, every digital clip, would be the cornerstone of our argument that in Cedar Glen, personal vendettas should never overshadow true service and protection. I soon circulated a message on the local community forum, urging anyone with additional evidence to come forward. The message, impassioned and raw, struck a chord. Residents shared their own frustrations about arbitrary fines, about moments when the HOA had overstepped its bounds, and about small acts of defiance that had been squashed. The digital conversation evolved rapidly, and soon it was clear that Karen's latest stunt was more than just an isolated incident. It was a symbol of everything wrong with the current system. The situation spiraled into a full-scale conflict. As the night deepened, I received a series of urgent messages on my phone. I saw her from across the street. My neighbor's security camera captured it too. The digital dossier was quickly growing, and with each new piece of evidence, the collective outrage mounted. I knew that the HOA board would eventually have to address this incident in a public meeting, and I began preparing my detailed report. My goal was simple: expose the absurdity of enforcing minor rules with lethal force and highlight Lena's calm, measured response as evidence of professional competence honed by experience. The more I prepared, the more I realized that this wasn't just about a taser. It was about the misuse of power and the right to live without fear of overzealous regulation. By the end of that turbulent night, it was clear to everyone involved that something had to change. The digital petitions, the shared images, the impassioned community discussions, all pointed to a community on the brink of revolution. The standoff was not just between an overzealous HOA and a defiant state trooper sister. It had become a battle for the soul of Cedar Glen, a fight for the right to respect true authority when it comes from competence, not coercion. In the days that followed the incident, the story of the taser standoff between the HOA officer and Lena spread like wildfire through Cedar Glen. Social media exploded with videos, hashtags, and memes that juxtaposed the overgrown bureaucracy of the HOA with the unyielding prowess of a Special Forces veteran. Hashtags like hashtag HOA cops fail, hashtag Special Forces sister, and hashtag Cedar Glen Revolt began trending across local online platforms, fueling a movement of collective defiance. Local news stations were quick to jump on the story. Reporters visited Cedar Glen, capturing interviews from bewildered neighbors and scenes of heightened security as local law enforcement rushed to ensure that no further abuse of power occurred. "It's remarkable," one anchor commented during a live broadcast, "to see a state trooper's own sister calmly deflecting an aggressive HOA officer, an act that has now become emblematic of a community's resistance to arbitrary rule enforcement." The narrative took on a life of its own, evolving from a mere standoff into a powerful symbol of accountability and individual rights. Within the walls of the HOA board, the fallout was immediate and dramatic. Emergency meetings were held in cramped conference rooms, and the board's leadership found itself splintering into factions. Some members still clung to the idea that strict adherence to rules was essential for maintaining order, while others, spurred by the overwhelming digital evidence and the impassioned support of the community, began questioning the legitimacy of enforcing trivial regulations with excessive force. Leaked meeting minutes revealed intense debates, with one member stating, "We risk losing the trust of our residents if we continue to allow personal vendettas to dictate our actions." The internal dissent rattled the board and signaled that the status quo was no longer acceptable. I bolstered my digital campaign by posting live updates and detailed analyses on community forums. I shared slow-motion replays of Lena's swift sidestep, highlighted the surprised expressions of the HOA officer, and even gathered testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed the event from their driveways. Every comment, every share, every supportive hashtag further amplified the message that Cedar Glen was not going to stand for this misuse of power. Throughout this period, Lena remained the calm center of the storm. In interviews, she explained that her training had prepared her for far more dangerous situations than a rogue HOA officer wielding taser. "I've faced much tougher challenges," she said in a measured tone, her eyes steady and unfazed by the chaos that ensued. Yet, even in her composed demeanor, there was an underlying hint of frustration, an acknowledgement that the very institutions meant to protect us were now being used to enforce petty, personal vendettas. The digital outcry soon reached the attention of local officials. The police department, under mounting pressure, issued statements reiterating that public safety protocols were not to be misused for personal agendas. A senior officer was quoted saying, "Our responsibility is to serve and protect the residents, and that includes ensuring that any abuse of power is thoroughly investigated." This incident is a stark reminder that professionalism must prevail. The official stance lent credibility to the movement, further isolating the rogue actions of the HOA officer and, by extension, Karen's ideology. As the final public hearing approached, the atmosphere in Cedar Glen grew electric. Residents organized rallies, circulated petitions, and displayed banners proclaiming property rights and freedom from arbitrary regulation. Every digital post, every shared video, and every rallying cry reinforced a single, unassailable truth. The community was ready for change. The voice of Cedar Glen had risen, uniting under the banner of accountability and the defense of individual rights. In the days leading up to the hearing, I personally met with small groups of residents, listening to their grievances and sharing my own story of defiance against institutional overreach. We discussed ideas for reform, debated strategies for future vigilance, and marveled at how a single incident had awakened the collective spirit of our community. It was a profound and moving experience, a testament to the power of unity when citizens refuse to be silenced by arbitrary authority. Every evening, as the sun set over Cedar Glen, my digital campaign grew stronger. I compiled every piece of evidence into a comprehensive dossier, complete with timestamps, witness statements, and expert analyses that unequivocally supported our cause. The dossier became a living document, a record of the community's right to live without being bullied by those who exploited their positions. By the time the final public hearing was announced, the support was overwhelming. Digital petitions had amassed tens of thousands of signatures, and local media coverage painted a vivid picture of a community on the brink of reclaiming its dignity. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, one in which the fate of Cedar Glen's future would be decided once and for all. The decisive moment arrived on a brisk, clear morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Glen Community Center. The room was teeming with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of resolute residents, all gathered to witness the final public hearing that would determine the fate of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm, yet commanding presence, Councilwoman Rachel Simmons stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the unwavering determination of a community that had had enough. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped footage, detailed logs of our security system, and the passionate testimonies from our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion, Councilwoman Simmons declared, her voice resonating with authority. It is unequivocal that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Jenkins, specifically the baseless use of force against a resident's family member and the subsequent overreach of HOA authority, were not motivated by any legitimate concern for public safety, but by personal bias and a flagrant abuse of power. In Cedar Glen, we believe that our safety and our rights should never be compromised by individuals who take the law into their own hands. A heavy silence settled over the room as Simmons continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions related to this incident and initiate a comprehensive disciplinary review of the practices that enabled such abuse. Furthermore, new guidelines will be established to ensure that our community is governed by fairness, transparency, and the unwavering protection of individual rights. Today's decision is not merely about correcting an isolated overreaction. It is a resounding declaration that we, as a community, will stand against the tyranny of arbitrary enforcement. Her words struck a deep chord in the assembly. Murmurs of agreement and supportive applause swept through the room. At that moment, a well-respected community advocate, renowned for his unyielding defense of personal freedoms, stood to speak. "Today, we stand united," he proclaimed, his voice firm and impassioned. No resident in Cedar Glen should ever be forced to live in fear of personal vendettas masquerading as public service. Let this vote mark the turning point, a testament to our collective strength and our refusal to allow individuals to abuse their power at the expense of our community's well-being. We demand accountability, and we pledged to defend our rights with every resource available. His heartfelt declaration was met with thunderous applause, a powerful, unified call for reform. Following this stirring address, a senior officer from the local oversight committee presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert analyses, and witness testimonials confirming that the HOA officer's use of a taser against my sister was unwarranted and that our community's safety protocols had been twisted into a tool for personal vendettas. The evidence was irrefutable, and the Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary action against those responsible for the abuse of power. The full report was slated for immediate public release, ensuring transparency and reinforcing our demand for change. Councilwoman Simmons concluded her address. Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Glen, an era where individual rights, creative freedom, and public safety coexist in harmony without the fear of arbitrary interference. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our community's values and that no one, regardless of their authority, is above accountability. Together, we stand for justice, integrity, and the inalienable right to live free from intimidation. Her final words echoed resolutely throughout the boardroom, sealing a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of our community. In that defining moment, as every face in the room glowed with determination and hope, the balance of power in Cedar Glen shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence, the impassioned community voices, and the unyielding call for reform forced the HOA board to take decisive action. The days of petty, arbitrary enforcement were now behind us, and a future built on respect for individual rights and public accountability was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following that historic vote, Cedar Glen began to transform. News of the rescinded sanctions and the sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread quickly through local media and community social networks, igniting fervent discussions about property rights, public safety, and individual freedom. Editorials in the local newspaper, bearing headlines like "A New Dawn for Cedar Glen" and "Community United Against Arbitrary Rule," celebrated the decisive measures taken to protect every resident's right to live and work without fear of undue interference. Hashtags such as hashtag No More HOA Bullying, hashtag Property Rights, and hashtag Justice for Cedar Glen trended widely, reinforcing the community's renewed spirit. Town hall meetings and community forums saw unprecedented attendance as residents gathered to share their personal stories of struggle and empowerment. Neighbors, once intimidated by the overzealous enforcement of petty rules, now spoke boldly about the right to express their individuality and manage their own properties. Our homes and our lives belong to us, one impassioned resident declared at a crowded meeting, his voice ringing clear with conviction. The atmosphere was one of hope, a renewed promise that Cedar Glen would always honor the rights of its residents. Within the newly reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs emphasizing ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and responsible community management. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to guarantee that every complaint would be thoroughly reviewed and that no resident would ever again suffer from arbitrary fines or invasive scrutiny. Our duty is to protect both our community's safety and our individual freedoms, Lieutenant Reed reaffirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the renewed commitment to justice and accountability. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to further empower the residents of Cedar Glen. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and the importance of safeguarding personal freedom. When we stand together, our voices can dismantle outdated systems, a local activist proclaimed at one such meeting, inspiring many to join in the call for reform. For me, the journey from that fateful standoff to this moment of triumph was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up for my sister and for the community despite the intimidating force of overzealous HOA cops, had not only restored my sense of justice, but had ignited a broader movement of accountability. Neighbors who had long been silenced now shared their own stories of resistance, and the digital evidence that initially captured the absurdity of that night became a powerful symbol of what we had achieved. Karen Jenkins, once the self-appointed enforcer of Cedar Glen's arbitrary regulations, quickly became a cautionary tale. Digital archives of her past overreaches, once her shield, now served as undeniable proof of the need for reform. Her influence waned as residents began to demand that such abuses of power be met with transparency and accountability. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Glen, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the fading gold of a setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Accountability" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches filled the evening air with promises of a future free from arbitrary rule. Today, we celebrate not only our victory over oppressive enforcement, but also our collective strength to stand for what's right, Councilwoman Simmons proclaimed, her voice resonating with unwavering conviction. The resounding ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our community's commitment to safeguard our freedoms for generations to come. As each new day dawned over Cedar Glen, the legacy of our struggle endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of that tense standoff, where my sister, a hardened Special Forces veteran, effortlessly deflected power-tripping HOA antics, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of individual rights. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Cedar Glen, truth, justice, and personal freedom would forever reign, free from arbitrary interference. In the end, what began as an isolated, tense encounter evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined than ever to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Glen would forever be a place where courage, creativity, and respect for individual freedom shone as brightly as the morning light.